Hey everybody, Andrew Hogue here, your security, privacy, and forensics expert. And I'm back with part 3 of developing a Hacker News reader in iOS using GitHub Copilot X. In the previous video, we got Firebase set up a Firestore, and then have a model view which looks like it's going to connect to the APIs and then help us download the data. At this point though, the code isn't actually firing because there's no way to trigger it. So we're going to dive in and see if we can get that to work and see where things take us. Now, full disclosure, it's been a full week since I last started coding on this. I was traveling, I had all-day management meetings, and so not only a little bit rusty, but I kind of cheated, and in between breaks and whatnot, I would tinker a little bit with this and actually ran into quite a few issues, and I ultimately resolved them yesterday. So I'm going to be coming in and showing you basically what I would do from scratch. But I have some lessons learned that haven't been recorded, and so I just wanted to be super transparent about that. Okay, if you remember in the last video, we basically got the Firebase configured. So we included it through the Swift package manager. We imported it into our app delegate, which you can see over here. We created this model view, and then Copilot helped us create this code right here. And when I run it, there were no errors, which I had been running into errors prior to that. So I basically figured things were successful and time to go to the next step. So let's go ahead and do that so I can just kind of follow along with what I did last time. So what we have here is a class that is an observable object. And this is a way with Swift and imperative programming, you can basically say like, hey, other objects or other code can subscribe to changes that occur in this particular class. And so if you come over to the NewsView, which where we would typically want to pull this, we basically want to listen in and say, hey, if there's changes in the TopStoriesModelView, I want to be able to observe that here. So Copilot makes a recommendation here. I'm going to go ahead and accept this. So this is the observed object, and you can see it's a stories model view. And this actually doesn't quite look right, because really what we wanted to be creating is a new top story model view. And this is just saying stories model view. I'm actually going to delete that for a second and come here. And then I'm going to do Alt close bracket and just see if there's another suggestion. So it doesn't look like Copilot has another suggestion. And I'm going to cheat here a little bit. So this is the code that I know works, and this is actually what it recommended last time. And so I'm pasting it in here. I guess this time around, again, this is a non-deterministic system. It's in private beta right now, so it's being constantly updated. But if you look at this, this is basically saying like, okay, I have an object here that you're going to tag with this property state object. We'll call it top stories, and then it's going to invoke the top stories model view. So let's go ahead and kill that for a second. All right, so let's try to prompt it then with a comment. And let's say create a state, not state variable, for the top stories model view. Wait, not model, not mobile. Okay. Okay, and then let's see if there's any other alternatives. Okay, at state object var top stories model view. Okay, this looks correct. So what this is going to do now, and let me save this, is it's basically going to say like, if there are changes in the top story model view, go ahead and notify this view, and it's going to create a new object here, which is then going to kick off this init, which is going to connect to Firestore and then download everything. So let's come back over. Let's make sure we can build. That succeeded. Let's go ahead and run. And now this is going to crash. And this is where I got stuck for some time. And the error that I ended up getting was initially talking about Cloud Firestore API is not being used in this project, and that it couldn't reach it. And I basically tried a whole bunch of things. And what I ended up realizing, and I'm going to come back over here, part of the problem is that we actually don't want to use Firestore. And I'll have to go back through the previous video and see whether or not Firestore is what Copilot recommended. But I basically went down a rabbit hole and I started just doing tons of searches. And I ran into a bunch of different issues. You can see some of them in here, like currently it wasn't in scope. So I actually had to do some imports in the particular files. And I asked it how to import that, and then how to configure it. And so you can see different suggestions here, but at this point I was prompting it for Firebase Firestore iOS, and that was actually wrong. Once I actually ended up running this code, I started getting issues like this here, which it says unavailable DNS resolution, and I just couldn't get the API to resolve, and I really couldn't figure out what was happening. So I fell back on kind of my normal way and spent some time Googling. Like I said, in between meetings, I found some projects online. And what I really ended up realizing was we shouldn't be using Firestore at all. And honestly, we probably shouldn't be putting this in init, but I figured whatever, I'm just trying to figure this out. So let's not worry about that right now. So I'm going to delete, well, actually, I don't want to delete all of that. Let's keep init. I'm so used to my Vim bindings, which I need to get set up on here. Okay, so let's keep init for a minute. And what we need to do is actually create a Firebase database. And so here in the app delegate, we configure it. And then here we actually need to go create the connection itself. And so what was interesting is in my really initial question for Copilot, it actually told me how to do this, which is this database reference from URL right here. So I'm going to actually copy this because it's specifying a specific URL, and that's what I want. And let's see. Let's do this. Create a new Firebase database reference. To the TopStories endpoint. Okay. So let DB equals database reference. So this is not quite going to work, and probably I would have accepted it in the past. And the reason is we need to add in the URL for Hacker News. I'm just going to see whether or not there's another suggestion. So there is another suggestion. I don't like that one better. So I'm actually going to come over here, and as you can see, database reference, and then you've got from URL. So let's go ahead and try that. So we've got from URL, and then we're going to go ahead and just put this guy in here. So it's the V. Oh, actually, we're going to get rid of V0. So the actual URL is this endpoint, I believe, and then you get a reference to that, and then you set the child to V0, and then we want the next child, which is going to be the top stories. So let's actually just, well, one of the things we can do is just print db. Okay, let's save this. Let's come over here, and let's see if this guy will build. Okay. And yeah, this is interesting. Even though Copilot said from URL, I do remember in the code that I got working, it was just URL. It's actually kind of what I was thinking. So I'm just going to change this to URL. Okay, let's come back. Let's try building it again. Okay, that succeeded. Let's go run. And now, okay, so this is pretty cool. First of all, it automatically ran because we're on the top news, the news view. And now it looks like we have a valid URL. So let's see what we can do with that URL. Let's say loop through the first 500 stories. All right, let's see what happens. Okay, so we have DB query limited to first 500. I did some read. I'm going to accept this so we don't lose it. So I did some reading. There's different ways to do this. You can observe a single event. You could simply observe, which will then update this object anytime a new update is sent to Firebase, which is actually really cool for many, many applications. But I would say, like, if I'm flipping through Hacker News and I'm reading the top stories, I actually want to be able to get through that whole first page, even if a new top story comes in. So I'm just used to manually refreshing. So I'm not actually going to change it to observe. I am going to leave it at observe single event, which if you look at the documentation, it'll basically tell you that it can also like check the local cache and things of that sort. And then there is one that's just get data. And that's what you see some other apps out there using. They actually recommend against it because it's less efficient and they really want to be able to use this ability to notify. So I'm not sure what I'll do in the end. But anyway, so we're going to do a query to the first 500. We're going to observe that particular event. And for those values, we're going to flip through that snapshot. And then this is interesting, actually. So now it's creating a new database reference to, oh, this is cool, to the item itself. This will look at the story, and then it's going to create a new story based on my story model, which I have open here. And it's going to populate those. It's going to append it to self.topstories. Okay, to this guy here. And I think for giggles, let's just print out the story and see what we have. All right, let's save this and see what happens. And obviously this is like pretty inefficient creating it this way. There's a much better way to do it, but that's okay. I'm not really interested in that right now. So I'm going to come back. Let's see if this guy builds. The build succeeded, and let's go ahead and rerun it. Wow, that is super awesome. Well, actually, it's not super awesome that we had a fatal crash. So there was a nil when we were unwrapping an optional. It looks like one of these top story items, so Swift line 37, probably one of these values that we're referencing did not actually have a value and we're force unwrapping it. And so we need to kind of go fix that with like a if let or something along those lines. So let's go see what line 37 is. Line 37, okay. So we've got the ID, the title. I wonder if we can ask Copilot how to write this code in case these are missing. Let's see. Test each property first to make sure it is not nil. If it is nil, use a default value. Okay, cool. Let's see what happens. Now, I don't know the difference between like prompting it here versus like how to refactor it. So let's highlight this, and over here you can actually put in a slash command, and let's see if there's a refactor or a fix. Slash fix. The selected code does not check for nil, and if found, use a default value. Can you help me refactor it? All right, let's see. Okay, Certainly, here's the refactored version of the code that checks for no values and uses default values if necessary. Ooh, this looks, oh, I'm scrolled over. Okay. Yep. And this is pretty much what I was thinking I would have to do. And I was actually dreading writing out all these let statements. It gives me a little bit of explanation about using the nil coalescing operator for default value. So I'm going to go ahead and hit this little button, which I think will insert it at the cursor. All right. Okay. So, one of the things I don't love is, now that I think about it, like, if one of these values is not present on like the ID, I don't think we should pop in 0. We should probably like skip that entry and somehow flag it. But for now, I'm not going to do that. I'm just going to hit save and come back. And let's see if we can build. And honestly, I don't want 500. Well, let's keep it at 500 now. So if we can see if we can hit that nil condition again. Let's stop running it. Oh, build succeeded. All right, fine. Let's just go run it and see what happens. Okay, it didn't crash this time. So, and the very first story is War is a Racket, 1935. Let's go out to Hacker News real quick. And there you go. War is a Racket, 1935. 137 comments. So this looks pretty awesome. We've got the data there that I would expect. So as you can see, Copilot was actually a really big help here. I had to do a little bit of prompting, and I needed to know a little bit more about the types of variables that I wanted. Otherwise, it kind of sent me in the wrong direction. Again, if I had been recording this like the entire time I had been working on it, on and off over the past week, I really went down some rabbit holes using Firestore. And I really just needed to use a Firebase database. But once I figured that out, it was interesting to kind of prompt it, put the code in there. And then when I ran it, it worked. Of course, I was really excited. I think the other thing that was really cool is just to see Copilot X chat basically look at a piece of code and come back and say like, well, here's how you could fix it. And then it wrote that boilerplate code for me. So I could have written it. I could have looked it up. It would have been a lot of copy paste. I may have made mistakes, but it just analyzed the code and took care of that. So that's really awesome. I'm going to wrap this video up a little bit early. I'm generally doing these in like 30-minute increments. But one of the things that I realized is like anytime I get excited about a project, I dive right in. And I really kind of skipped over some important things. For one, I really should configure the LSP or the language service provider or language server provider so that the VS Code environment knows about Swift. Right now, this is like really silly that it doesn't know about Swift. There are some plugins or modules that can support that. So I'm gonna go set that up. So that should really help. The other thing is I'm not committing any of this to source code, which is dumb. Like I should be doing that. And because I'm kind of a solo developer, I'm not going to go too over the top here, but I'm thinking about just like starting over because it's not going to take me that long to recreate this stuff. And what I want to do is create like a Git flow kind of setup where I have a main branch where the main code is running or is being kept. I have like a develop branch. I'm using pull requests. And then because I'm involved in security and scanning mobile apps, I want to go set up security scans against the pull requests. So I'm thinking about doing static scans on the pull request and then a nightly dynamic scan against the dev branch. And then anytime somebody merges into main, it would get a full static and dynamic run. So I have a little bit of kind of housekeeping to do, and then I'm gonna, restart things. But I'll probably go ahead and record those sessions, and we'll just see how quickly that stuff goes. And I'll throw it in my unscripted programming playlist. So if somebody wants to follow along with all the details, that's great. Otherwise, I plan on having some really shortened, edited versions of this as well. So thanks so much for taking the time to watch today, and see you hopefully in part 4.